the Lapps, and
Well, it's a very rich
yeah.
and diverse history.
and Russia.
Welcome to Behind the Pages. Bruce Macbain is back with us today to talk about the Ice Queen. Bruce is a historian, and he's written several other books of historical fiction and historical mysteries. This book is the second in a series centered around an Icelandic man who travels to Russia and finds himself caught between a power struggle between two very strong political enemies. He needs to choose sides, but doesn't really want to. Welcome.
Thank you, Diane. It's good to be here again. I always enjoy talking with you.
I do too. So tell us about your main character, Odd, and the book. Just a little bit of a summary of the book.
Sure. The hero is Odd Tanglehair. That's O-D-D, which actually is an Icelandic man's name.
Right, not because he's bizarre.
Not because, but he is a little odd,
Yeah.
which is why I like the name. But it is actually it is a name. And story takes place in Iceland in the early 11th century, at a time when the country has converted to Christianity. But Odd's family are pagan. His father, Black Thorvald, has become a rather morose, solitary, half-mad character, cut off from all of his former contacts. They live on a farm under the volcano, Mount Hekla. Odd has a very difficult relationship with his father, but is loyal to the idea of paganism and devotee of the god Odin, the king of the gods. And in the first novel, in Odin's Child, there is a feud with another family, as a result of which Odd's family is wiped out, their house is burned, Odd flees with a ragtag crew of a few people in a stolen ship, and then embarks on a long series of adventures that take him all over the northern world. And I don't want to go into all of that in detail, but at the end of that book, he is at the borders of Russia. And here he meets young Prince Harold, a Norwegian princeling fleeing from his country and on his way to Russia to seek help from the Prince of Novgorod. Harold, they're both about the same age. They're both, we would call teenagers, except by Icelandic standards, they're already young adults, they're men. Harold has a violent temper, is arrogant, is ambitious, and Odd, for better or worse, signs on as his skald. A skald is a combination of court poet, confidant, advisor, ambassador. Anyhow, he decides that he will go with Harold to Russia. And there, as you said in your introduction, we are introduced to the court at Novgorod, kind of doddering old Prince Yaroslav and his beautiful, ambitious, cunning, ruthless wife, Princess Ingigerd. And Ingigerd, for complex reasons, hates Harold and is determined to destroy him. And she does this by seducing Odd and making him fall in love with her. And Odd is now walking a tightrope between these two dangerous people, either one of whom might destroy him if they find out that his allegiance has shifted to the other side. That's the premise of the book.
Okay, so this book actually opens with a prologue in which Odd is an old man and he's back in Iceland, and a young scribe has been assigned the task of writing down the history, of his life. As it begins, the scribe is not very complimentary of Odd. It doesn't seem to like him. Why not? What are his initial impressions?
This is actually my favorite idea in the book. The framing narrative of prologue and epilogue that bookend each of the novels. And this young man is Tate the deacon, the son of the bishop of Iceland, and a firm Christian, and a young man of about the age that Odd was when his adventures began, 16, 17, something like that.
Yeah.
And his father, the bishop, has sent him to take down Odd's story, not because they're interested in Odd, but because by this time Harold has become the famous king of Norway, and they want to collect anecdotes. But Odd insists, before I tell you anything about Harold, I will tell you my saga, my story. Takes him a long time to even get around to Harold.
Yeah.
And Tate hates this. He thinks that Odd is a crazy old man, heathen. He doesn't want his innocent ears to be exposed to this lechery and heresy. And so he's fighting this. He doesn't want to be there. And at the first opportunity, he escapes. However, and we don't know this until we get to the end of the first novel. And then we realize that this Odd, this charming, interesting young character is now a decrepit old man back in Iceland, living in poverty in the ruins of his hall, and we don't know why.
Right.
And Tate doesn't find out why. And even in the second novel, we don't find out why.
Right.
And you will have to wait to the end of the third novel, which is coming out later this year, to finally find out what happened to Odd and what proceeds from there, where the framing plot and the main plot come together.
Well, so the scribe describes Odd as a man with kind of a quick temper but a very keen wit. Would Odd agree with that?
Yes, I think so. I think Odd is always the first one to admit that his temper gets the best of him. But he has a good heart.
Yeah.
And he regrets these outbursts, and he regrets that sometimes there's no stepping back.
Yeah.
When he, at the end of the first novel, has his argument with his mentor, Stig, and realizes we can't go back from there, you know? And when he finally says goodbye to his crew, he says, one of us will have to leave, and I'm going to be the one to leave. I'm going on. And here's the money that I was paid as a bribe. I'm giving it to you to refit the ship, and I think you should make Stig the captain. And farewell.
Goodbye. Yeah. Yeah. So he's aware of his.
Yeah, he is. He's very self-aware.
Yeah.
He's very self-aware.
In fact, his father was a very moody and basically depressed man, as you started to say before. Would you say that Odd is anything like his father?
Yes, and in fact, he dreads the fact that he's like his father. And when we see him finally as an old man, living, he's basically become his father, which is maybe not such a rare fear that if we live long enough, we become our parents.
Yeah, right, right. Absolutely.
And that has always been Odd's fear, that there is this worm of cowardice, as he defines it, of madness, which he has inherited along with the unruly black hair from his father. And right from the very beginning of the novel, we sense that this troubles him.
In fact, I would say a lot of his youth was spent deliberately being opposite of his father, where his father would counsel, don't just let it go, even when you're provoked. Odd doesn't. He uses his temper.
Test himself.
Right.
That's why when he goes to the horse fight, which is the scene that opens the first novel, he puts himself forward and says, I have brought my horse here and I give my challenge. And his older brother Gunnar tries to talk him out of it, but he says, no, if I don't do it now, then I'm my father.
Right, and he doesn't want that. I mean, there are times in the story too where his temper works for him. You know, he takes a risk, and it actually does work too, but there are many times when it doesn't. It just doesn't seem like he wants to be able to learn to control the temper, at least as a young man, because I think for him then too, that would make him feel too much like his father.
Yeah, well, his relationship with Thorvald is ambiguous at the least. both loves and hates him.
Yes.
To him, he owes his knowledge of poetry, his gift with words, but at the same time, he hates what his father has become.
Yes.
So it's a very complex relationship.
So as Odd's story begins, he's just recovering from a fever that almost killed him, and he is at he's told that his man Einar has not left his side throughout the whole illness.
Wonderful Einar.
Yeah, he said, "Well, this isn't my servant," you know. So who is Einar?
Einar is, well, if we were going to use the analogy of the Old West, Einar is the last Indian fighter, the last gunslinger. I mean, he's a holdover from an earlier generation. He's a Joms Viking, and what little we know about the Joms Vikings is this was a military caste of Viking warriors who had a fortress on the Baltic Sea. And Einar, who's got only one eye, missing a hand, missing a leg, old, but tough as leather.
Yeah.
And Einar sticks with him, and they bond. I mean, it's Odd who persuades his crew to take Einar on and let him join them. And the other crew never warm up to Einar, but he and Odd are very close, and Einar almost becomes a kind of father to Odd. And does stay with them while Odd is ill, and then they go together to Novgorod.
Yes, I mean, those are the times when you see Odd's kindness, you know.
Yes, and his loyalty.
Yes, exactly. So, you know, it's clear that Odd isn't just out to make a fortune for himself. He really does watch out for
Odd's goal is to become rich and powerful enough to someday go back to Iceland and settle scores with the people the family who slaughtered his family, and with the powerful Christian chieftain Snorri. And then, of course, the sad thing is that we see at the end that Odd has come back, but he hasn't done any of those things.
I know, yeah, although, yeah.
But we will find out, but
okay.
But I'm not going to give it away because that would take the fun away.
That's right, absolutely. We have to read the book and find out, yeah. Odd is at a man's house named Ragnvald. I think I'm hopefully saying that right. It's clear that Odd doesn't like or trust this man. So how did he come to be in his house?
Well, Ragnvald is the cousin of Ingigerd.
Okay.
They're Swedish. She was actually Swedish. And it's a real character, although I've given him a personality. We don't really know much about him. But he was her cousin. And when she went to Russia to become the consort of old Prince Yaroslav, she set him up as the governor of this town of Aldeigyaborg, which is really on the border of, on Lake Ladoga, actually. On the frontier of Russia, and you have to call upon him. You have to pass through his hall if you're going to go on any farther. That's why Harold is there with his small entourage, and Odd winds up there, and it's Ragnvald who offers Odd a bribe to betray Harold. And that last scene in Odin's Child, Odd takes almost all of the gold and gives it to his crew. It says, everybody thinks they own me, and nobody owns me.
Yeah. So his first task, once he's recovered, is to bring some books and goods to Yaroslav in the city of...
Who was called Yaroslav the Wise.
Oh, okay. And this is...
Because he actually owned a few books.
Oh.
Which was an astonishing thing. And not only owned them, but wrote them. He is known for having created Russia's first law code. The law code of Novgorod. He actually wrote it.
Yes, because...
so he is a historical character, and a little bit is known about him. We know, for example, that he walked with a limp, that he was not physically robust, that he was not your typical Rus warrior, that he was bookish, studious, and so I've created him in contrast to his wife Ingigerd, who is quite a bit younger than he is, and who is the tough guy in the family.
She definitely is. And in fact, the first thing that Odd witnesses when he arrives at the hall is her disciplining the children.
Right.
For being unruly. But her interactions with one of them is different. Can you tell us about that with Magnus?
Well, with Magnus, let me first
Okay.
think about her daughter, Elizaveta, who is also a historical character, who Harold decides as soon as he gets there that he's going to make her his wife someday. She's probably at this time about 14, and Harold is 16 going on 17. And of course, this drives Ingigerd frantic. Okay. And in fact, just to a historical aside, this happened. Harold did marry Elizabeth, and she went back eventually with him to Norway and became Queen of Norway. Magnus, however, is the illegitimate son of Harold's, this gets confusing, I know, is the illegitimate son of Harold's half-brother, Olaf. Saint Olaf, King Olaf, King Olaf's College is named after him, who brought Christianity to Norway, but was then defeated and killed in battle, and that's why Harold fled. But Harold and Magnus are bound to be enemies, because Harold is the half-brother, Magnus is the illegitimate son. There is no real legitimate heir. So one of these two is going to wind up being King of Norway. Ingigerd is backing Magnus because Ingigerd, in fact, had been in love with Olaf and just wants to champion Magnus, and that's why she hates Harold. I know this is complex. You know, well, if you read it, it makes a bit more sense.
Not only that, but you're very considerate in giving us a whole family tree so we can figure out who everybody is. I like that part. I had to keep going back there, right? Because the names are complicated as well.
They are. And to take pity on the reader, there is a list of characters.
Yes.
There is a genealogy of the Norwegian royal family, of the Russian royal family. So if you pay attention, you can keep the players sorted out.
Absolutely, yeah. But she does favor Magnus.
Little Magnus.
Yeah, little Magnus. Is this because she's raising him? I mean,
Because she's fostering. Olaf left Magnus to Yaroslav and Ingigerd as to foster. When he went back to try to fight for his throne in Norway and got killed at the Battle of Stiklestad. So she feels this need to protect Magnus. And again, historical aside, Magnus did become King of Norway. He was known as Magnus the Good, and eventually Harold kicked him out, looking ahead a few years.
And she's very tender and loving to him.
Yes.
On the other hand, her interactions with her oldest daughter are not the same, are they?
No, they don't get along. They don't get along, and the fact that Harold is paying court to her, as I said, drives her wild. Yeah. And Elizaveta refuses to consider being betrothed to anybody else, which is true. Yeah. And they did eventually.
Yes, because initially, as at least Odd meets her, she's betrothed to someone else.
Yeah, she's betrothed to Eilif, the son of Ragnvald. Okay, but that doesn't. She has no interest in that, and Eilif is, well, we won't get into all the details.
Right.
And then at the same time, I want to just shift the focus a little bit. While all of this is going on, the wild Pecheneг tribesmen are invading southern Russia and besieging Kiev, and they all have to rush down there and rescue Kiev, and it's thanks to a very clever stratagem of Odd's that they succeed in relieving the siege and defeating the Pechenegs. And for a moment, Odd is a hero, but this will not last. I mean, you will find that tide is turning against him.
Yeah, he seems to have that kind of a life where he's run sort of at the crest of the wave and then drops down.
He has the worst luck in the world.
Yeah, yeah. There's a large Swedish population in Novgorod. How did this come to be?
We do happen to know that the princes of Novgorod, particularly Yaroslav, imported a lot of Swedish mercenaries because Ingigerd was Swedish. She was the daughter of the Swedish king. Yeah. And they imported a lot of Swedish mercenaries, and we gather that there was a sizable number of them there. who did not get along with the native population. They were kind of a foreign, they had their own barracks, their own commander, and so there's tension there. But there was a lot of back and forth between, you must remember that Russia, that the land of the Rus in this time, had deep roots in Norse culture. I mean, the original Rus were Danes. And there was constant back and forth of people coming from Scandinavia, either to make their fortune in Russia or to pass through Russia on their way to Constantinople. So there's lots of Norwegians and Swedes all over the place there.
Okay, yeah.
And the occasional Icelander, too. We do happen to know this.
Yeah. Ingigerd summons Odd to to meet with her, and he gives her back some of the gold that was paid to him, and he says, "I just want you to know I will not be your spy." Can you explain what that's all about?
Well, Odd is determined to be his own man. Of the what was it? I think 12 ounces of gold that Ragnvald gave him. He gave 10 to his crew.
Right, as
and
you
with
had
the
said.
rest, he bought some new clothes. And he goes, "Here, I'm giving this back
Take
to
the
you.
rest."
You are under the impression that your cousin Ragnvald has hired me to spy on Harold. I'm not. Right? As long as I'm Harold's man, I will be Harold's man. So here's the money back." That's
And
the kind of guy Odd is. You know?
Right.
And then she gives him 1 ounce back. And says, I'm trying to think of the line. She says, "The money was given in a bad cause, and I have no doubt that you spent it on a good cause, and here, this is for you." And he takes it. But this is the beginning of her winning him over, and pretty soon they're in bed together.
Right. And she's somebody who seems to be able to switch gears pretty quickly. You know, you can kind of see the wheels starting to turn. Okay, if I can't buy him, how else can I get him on my side?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, she's old enough to be his mother, but she's still a very attractive woman. And he finds he's fascinated by her.
Yeah.
This is somebody completely out of his experience. And he falls. He succumbs. He loves her.
Yeah.
You know? And now, what to do?
Yes. And he can't really tell Harold what he's doing.
He can't tell her. Harold would go nuts.
Because they're both enemies. They're in a power struggle against each other.
So here he is, as Einar says, "You are in a pit between 2 wolves."
Yes. Right.
Einar is always trying to give Odd advice, which Odd mostly doesn't take.
Right. Right. As a reader, you're kind of, encouraging him sometimes. Please listen here.
Have a little sense here.
Right.
That's not Odd.
No, definitely not. Ingigerd's husband and his brother are just returning from a battle, or returned from a battle pretty soon after Odd arrives. They both greet Ingigerd, and her response is pretty cold. What is her relationship with her husband and his brother?
Well, okay, as far as history, as far as the Russian primary chronicle, which is the Russian source where this goes, Ingigerd hardly exists. Her name is just mentioned, and we don't learn anything much about her because the Russian primary chronicle is basically not interested in women. It tells us quite a bit about Yaroslav, and as I said, we gather that he was unmilitary, bookish, a terribly nice man, but involved with his, The Norse sources on Ingigerd paint a very interesting picture. She is cunning, she is ruthless, she is headstrong, and so that's what I used. You know? And she has never loved Yaroslav. This is something her father forced her to do. Her heart has always been with Olaf, who's dead now, see, but she's still carrying that torch, and she doesn't care much for Yaroslav, and even less for Yaroslav's loud, burly, bumptious brother Mstislav, who she really doesn't like.
Yeah, she doesn't really respect either brains or brawn, it seems like, because of the 2 brothers. Her husband is very academic, although he does go to battle. But
he does, but he's never going to get any credit from Ingigerd.
Right.
Yeah, and I was about to make a point and I lost it now. But anyway.
Oh, yes, yeah. No, I mean, it seems like no matter what he did, she would not have respected him because she never really chose him as a husband, which women of that time didn't, you know. Yeah.
This strange love affair with Olaf, who she had only met briefly, and who then promptly went off and got himself killed.
Yeah.
This is true. I mean, we know that he courted her, he wrote poems to her, he won her heart, although they had barely ever seen each other.
Yeah.
And we gathered that for her, this never died. You know? And this is authentic.
Right. Well, of course, then
It's
it could
a very
remain.
curious situation, but this is what happened.
And of course, it could remain more of a fantasy since they didn't ever really know each other very well.
Right, and we don't really quite know what went on. In Snorri's biography of King Olaf, who by that time was saintly, and you couldn't suggest anything improper about him,
Yeah.
Snorri steers away from that. Whatever Snorri might have known, he's not going to tell us. You know, we don't really know whatever happened between the two of them.
Yeah. Odd tells us about Harold's success, you know, in battle, and in how he's really a very good leader, you know, when it comes to military strategy. But he also says he could never be Harold's friend. Why is this?
Because nobody can be Harold's friend. My, at least, version of Harold, and we have a whole biography of him also by Snorri Sturluson, who wrote all of these royal biographies 2 centuries later. My sense of Harold, and which is Odd's understanding, is that Harold is so self-centered, so self-consumed, and with such a chip on his shoulder, with such a feeling of grudge because he was the despised half-brother, you know. He never got the respect that he thought he was entitled to. He did later on come to be called Harold the Ruthless, Harold Hardrada.
Yeah.
And also because he was a giant. He was huge. At the age of 15, he was well over 6 feet tall.
Okay.
The only other Russian who ever got to be that tall was Peter the Great,
Yeah.
who I think has something in common with them.
Yeah.
And as Odd understands it, Harold was, because of his size, called upon to be a man before he really was a man.
Yeah.
And he has always to be proving something.
Yes.
And it's impossible to ever be Harold's friend.
Yeah.
And Odd realizes this pretty quickly. He will serve him, because he said he would. He took the oath, you know, he took the arm ring.
Right.
But he says no one can ever be Harold's friend.
Well, yes, and it's really not in Odd's nature to, you know, kind of handle people, you know, which is basically the only way you could even give the illusion of friendship, I think, with Harold, is to be his handler as opposed to his friend.
You know.
Yeah.
He tries, but he's not that good at it.
No.
And the older counselor, Dag Ringson, who has come with Harold, who's older, and he's his mentor, and he's the one who appeals to Odd, join us.
Yes.
Become his skull.
Yeah.
He likes you. And God knows I don't know how to control this young fellow anymore. You're more his age. Maybe, you know, you can advise him.
Yes.
And then Odd says, you know, I don't know anything about courts. What advice could I give him?
Right.
And Dag says, well, we would weigh the advice ahead of time, wouldn't we? And Odd says, well, then it wouldn't exactly be my advice, would it?
Right.
You know, but he
and he's very, and he's quite clear.
Yeah.
I do have to tell you, we are out of time,
my God,
and it
it
happens,
happened
yes, right, it goes very fast. You have been watching Behind the Pages from the staff of 22 City View. I'm Diane Goshgarian, and thank you. That really did fly by, didn't it?
It always does.
It's great, yeah.